The war had been dragging on for longer than any of us had hoped. The Zorith Empire, with its vast fleets and unmatched firepower, had swept through the galaxy like a hurricane, leaving nothing but destruction in its wake. They weren't just conquerors, they were annihilators. Planets that had once thrived with life were now little more than lifeless husks, and entire species had been driven to the brink of extinction. The United Galactic Alliance, a coalition of species from various corners of the galaxy, had tried to fight back, but it was a losing battle. The Zorith's technological superiority made it impossible for us to mount any serious resistance. Our fleets were decimated in hours. Our planets, once shining symbols of progress, were now only memories. The Alliance, which had once stood proud against the forces of tyranny, was now fractured and weak. Our armies were stretched thin, our resources running low, and our morale even worse. Some of the species within the Alliance had already given up, unwilling to continue fighting a war they believed was already lost. Others, like us, the Krithar, had no choice but to keep pushing forward, hoping that somehow, some way, the tide might turn. But as the days bled into years, our hope faded. We were beginning to believe that the Zorath were unstoppable. Every time we thought we had found a way to fight back, they adapted, their technology evolving faster than our own. They had no mercy, no weakness. To them, it was all just a matter of time before every world would fall under their rule. I remember the day the message came. It was a routine check of the comms channels. Our fleet, battered and broken, was positioned near a once beautiful planet that now lay in ruins, its atmosphere scorched and its cities reduced to ash. We had just finished another futile attempt to retake one of our lost outposts when the signal pinged on the terminal. At first, we thought it was a malfunction, a stray signal from one of the remnants of the Alliance, but then the message repeated. "We're coming, hold on, we'll be there soon." The message was brief, but it sent ripples of confusion through the fleet. We all looked at each other, unsure of what to make of it. Who was this? A new ally? A distress signal from another system? But the voice on the other end didn't sound like one of the Alliance members. It wasn't the formal tone of the Krell or the precise speech of the Elorians. It was human. A young, confident voice with an edge of determination, almost a kind of defiance. We had only recently made contact with humanity. They were a young species, not much more than children in the grand scheme of galactic history. The idea that they could be coming to help us, to fight against the Zorith, seemed almost laughable. The humans, they had no fleet worth speaking of, no advanced technology. How could they possibly stand against the Zorath? It wasn't arrogance that made us dismiss their message, but sheer logic. We had been fighting this war for so long, and the Zorath had crushed every race that tried to oppose them. The humans were outclassed in every way. There was no way they could make a difference. Yet, despite our skepticism, the message came again, this time with a little more detail. The humans had built a fleet, small but surprisingly formidable. It was nothing compared to the Zorath, of course, but the very idea that they could mount an offensive was more than we had ever expected from them. They didn't ask for our permission, didn't seek approval from the Alliance. They simply said they were coming, and they would fight alongside us. The audacity, the bravery, or perhaps the madness of it made us hesitate. But we were desperate. We had nothing left to lose. It wasn't long before their ships started to appear on our sensors, at first in small numbers, and then growing larger as more of them arrived from their distant homeworld. They had kept their word, and for the first time in years we had a glimmer of hope. It was impossible to believe at first. The humans were nothing more than a wild card, a species that had no place in the galactic hierarchy. Yet here they were, refusing to back down. They were making good on their promise, and we, against all reason, began to wonder if, just maybe, they could be the ones to tip the scales in our favor. It wasn't long before the first wave of human ships reached our sector, and the reality of their arrival began to settle in. At first, the sight of their fleet seemed almost absurd. They were nothing like the grand, polished warships of the Zorath, or even the ships of the other Alliance species. Their vessels were crude by galactic standards, built with a strange combination of old Earth technologies and salvaged parts from other races. They didn't have the smooth, sleek designs that we were used to seeing. Instead, their ships looked like they had been thrown together in a hurry. Angular, rough, and patched with mismatched materials. But even so, there was a fire in them, an energy that could not be ignored. The human fleet, though small compared to the massive Zorath armada, was clearly not there to negotiate or offer empty promises. They were here to fight. What we first mistook for desperation quickly became clear was pure resolve. As the ships emerged from hyperspace, they scattered across our sensors like a swarm of hornets, small but quick, and with a singular purpose. They didn't wait for orders, they moved in unison, a tight formation that spoke to years of training and preparation. It was almost as if they were one body, one mind, and they knew exactly what they were here to do. For the first few minutes, we held our breath, unsure of how the Zorath would respond. They had seen many fleets before, but nothing like this. The Zorath were used to overwhelming superiority, both in numbers and in technology. What could these humans do? What could a small fleet of underdog ships possibly achieve? But to our surprise, the humans didn't hesitate. They didn't wait for the enemy to make the first move. Instead, they fired. It wasn't a show of strength. It was precise. There was no flashy barrage of energy weapons or reckless attacks. Every shot, every strike from the humans was calculated, purposeful. Their ships fired in perfect synchronization, weaving between enemy fire with agility that left the Zorath groping for answers. The Zorath, who were used to commanding the battlefield with their superior firepower and vast fleets, found themselves on the defensive for the first time in a long while. The humans' ships were fast, faster than anything the Zorath had anticipated. They darted in and out of formation, targeting weak points in the Zorath fleet that none of us had been brave enough to exploit. They didn't simply engage the largest Zorath warships. They went after the smaller, more vulnerable vessels that often went unnoticed. In doing so, they disrupted the Zorath's entire command structure. The Zorath ships, accustomed to overwhelming their enemies, struggled to keep up with the human tactics. They were being outmaneuvered by ships that shouldn't have been able to stand up to them. At the same time, the humans' communication was flawless. Their ships operated as one unit, responding to each other's movements in perfect harmony. It wasn't just their technology that impressed us. It was their coordination, their speed, and the way they seemed to think several steps ahead of their enemies. It was as though they were playing a game of chess, while the Zorath were stuck playing checkers. Every maneuver, every strike had a purpose, and it became clear that the humans were not only surviving, they were winning. The Zorath couldn't adapt fast enough to their strategies, and in those early hours, we saw something that we hadn't seen in years. The Zorath faltered. The impact was immediate. The first few hours of the battle were chaos, but it was a chaotic dance that the humans led. They didn't flinch under pressure. Instead, they doubled down. Their fleet, small as it was, began to tear through the Zorath's lines. The bigger Zorath ships, which had been so imposing, were crippled one by one. It wasn't just brute force that was bringing them down. It was precision and timing. The humans took out shields, targeted propulsion systems, and destroyed weapon systems, all with the kind of tactical brilliance that no one had thought possible from a species still so young. And then, as the battle wore on, something even more extraordinary happened. The humans, despite their lack of numbers, started to shift the momentum. They didn't just fight, they adapted. Every time the Zorth made an adjustment, the humans countered with something even more unpredictable. They didn't have the luxury of overwhelming firepower, but they made up for it with their determination and their will to win. This was not a war of attrition. This was a war of strategy, and the humans were playing it better than anyone else. The Zorath began to make mistakes. They underestimated their enemy. The humans' ability to exploit those weaknesses, however small, was astonishing. What had once seemed like an unthinkable hope was now beginning to feel like a very real possibility. The Zorath, for the first time, were on the defensive. They had underestimated the humans, and now they were paying for it. It was no longer just about fighting back. It was about winning. And we watched in awe as the humans led the charge. The battle that had once seemed hopeless was now shifting, slowly but surely, in our favor. The impossible had begun to look possible, and for the first time in years, there was hope. Hope that the tide was turning, hope that perhaps the humans were the answer we had been waiting for. As the battle raged on, the scale of what was happening began to sink in. The Zorath, once so confident in their superiority, were slowly unraveling. Their ships, once impervious, were now taking hits, critical hits. The human fleet, though vastly outnumbered, continued its relentless assault. Each strike was deliberate, surgical, as if they had mapped out the entire Zorath's fleet in their minds before they even arrived. It was a spectacle we had never witnessed in our countless years of warfare. The humans moved with an almost unnatural synchronicity, their ships darting and weaving with precision that seemed impossible. They weren't relying on sheer firepower. They were leveraging speed, agility, and the element of surprise. A Zorath battleship would open fire, unleashing a barrage of plasma, but the human ships were already gone, no longer in the same spot, already evading the attack before it even had a chance to land. The Zorath seemed baffled. They were used to overwhelming their enemies with brute strength. But the humans weren't fighting the same kind of battle. They were playing a different game altogether. We had thought the human fleet would falter after the first wave, but they kept pushing forward, showing no signs of slowing down. The Zorath, on the other hand, were starting to show cracks in their previously invincible armor. At first, they had tried to regroup, repositioning their ships into a more defensive formation. But the humans were relentless. They attacked from every angle, breaking apart the Zorath's defensive lines with ease. The human ships were like gnats, constantly darting in and out of the Zorath's reach, hitting weak spots where their defenses were thin. Every time a Zorath ship fell, it was as if a weight had been lifted. We had watched for so long as entire fleets of our own ships were obliterated, but now we were witnessing the Zorath's own ships burning and falling apart. The sound of explosions, the flicker of collapsing shields, the sudden death of a massive warship. These were things we had grown numb to. But now, with each fallen Zorath vessel, there was something new, something resembling hope, a hope that, for the first time, we might just have a chance to win. The human ships were also different in another way. They seemed to take more risks than we ever would have dared. They didn't stay in safe zones or adhere to any rigid tactics. If the Zoraths shifted their position, the humans adapted instantly, adjusting their formations without hesitation. They didn't just play defense or wait for a perfect opening. They created openings where none had existed before. In one particularly stunning maneuver, a small squadron of human ships singled out a Zorath dreadnought, one of the largest and most heavily armed ships in their fleet. The Zorath dreadnought, secure in its imposing size, made the mistake of underestimating its attackers. It opened fire with its heavy plasma cannons, aiming to wipe out the human ships that dared to challenge it. But the humans didn't engage in a direct confrontation. Instead, they split into two groups. One group lured the dreadnought into a trap, drawing it into a narrow asteroid belt, while the other group flanked it from behind. Before the Zorath even realized what was happening, the human ships were already inside its defenses, striking its propulsion systems and communication arrays with pinpoint accuracy. It wasn't just the Zorath ships that were faltering. Their leadership was starting to break down too. The Zorath commanders, who had once been so unflappable in their authority, were now scrambling. The human tactics were unlike anything they had faced before, so unpredictable, so fast, that they couldn't keep up. What had started as a skirmish had become a full-scale war, with the humans at the heart of it. The desperation was palpable among the Zorath. They tried to regroup, to form new strategies, but they had underestimated the resolve of the humans. They were no longer fighting against a disorganized resistance. They were fighting against a force that not only had the will to win, but the ability to do so. And in those first few hours, the Zorath started to crumble. What amazed us even more was how the humans fought not just with technology, but with heart. There was no hesitation, no second guessing. They threw everything into the battle, and every ship in their fleet seemed to understand their role in the larger scheme. There was no room for ego, no room for self-preservation. Each human vessel was a part of something bigger, a singular effort to wipe the Zorath off the map, to take back what had been lost. We had been watching from the sidelines, but now we were witnessing the most incredible shift in the war. The Zorath, once so confident, were faltering. Their ships were breaking apart. Their formations were in disarray. Their commanders were scrambling to make sense of what was happening. The humans had shattered the Zorath's facade of invincibility, and now it was only a matter of time before the Zorath would be forced to retreat. For the first time in years, it felt like the war was turning. The tide was shifting in our favor. And it was all because of the humans, their ingenuity, their courage, and their relentless will to win. Why, by the time the first hour had passed, the Zorath were in full retreat. It was nearly impossible to believe what we were witnessing. The battle, which had seemed so hopeless just a short while ago, was now a scene of utter chaos for the Zorath. The once proud warships that had threatened to decimate our worlds were now scattered, their fleets in disarray. The human ships, though fewer in number, were like a storm. Relentless, fast, and unforgiving, their tactics were baffling to the Zorath, who had expected an easy victory, not this coordinated, unpredictable assault. We watched as the humans didn't just continue to fight. They escalated their efforts. Their ships surged forward with a kind of fury that seemed to take the Zorath by surprise. What had started as a series of skirmishes had evolved into a series of surgical strikes. No Zorath ship was safe anymore. From their massive command ships to their smaller support vessels, every Zorath craft was now a target. It wasn't just about destroying ships. It was about systematically dismantling the entire Zorath war machine. And there was a war machine. One by one, the Zorath flagship vessels that had been the backbone of their offensive fell. The human ships focused on disabling critical systems, engines, weapons, shields, striking at the heart of each Zorath ship, before retreating at speeds that made it impossible for the Zorath to retaliate. It was as if the humans had an uncanny ability to predict their enemies' moves before they even made them. They didn't just fire randomly, they fired with purpose. Every shot, every missile, every energy blast was calculated to weaken, to destabilize, to destroy. Suddenly, the human fleet, though small, had a clarity of purpose that seemed to elude the Zorath. Their ships, equipped with hastily repaired technology and crude weapons, were now proving themselves far more effective than anyone had expected. It was not just their ships, but their minds, their strategies that were winning the battle. They fought not only with the strength of their weapons, but with the strength of their intelligence. They weren't bogged down by convention. They didn't follow traditional tactics. They invented their own. In the midst of this chaos, there was an eerie quiet on our own side. For so long, we had fought in desperation, our will crumbling under the weight of the Zorath's might. We had been fighting a losing battle for so long that the idea of victory seemed like an impossible dream. But now, as the humans tore through the Zorath fleet, something changed. The Krithar, once hesitant and reserved, began to rally. Ships that had been retreating in the face of overwhelming odds suddenly turned back to join the fight. The sight of the humans' courage and determination was contagious. If they could do it, so could we. It was more than just military might that was changing the course of the war. It was the spark of hope. The humans had not only struck a blow against the Zorath, they had reignited a fire within us, a fire we had thought long extinguished. Our own fleet, which had once been scattered and broken, began to reform. We watched as smaller ships joined the fray, as more firepower was directed toward the retreating Zorath. The human success had given us a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time, we were fighting not out of fear or obligation, but out of belief that the Zorath could be beaten, that we could win. The Zorath's desperation was palpable. They began to send reinforcements, ships they had been hiding in the outer edges of the system, hoping to turn the tide. But the humans had already anticipated this. Their next move was even more daring. Instead of holding back or forming defensive lines, they pressed forward, cutting through the reinforcements like a knife through butter. The Zoraths had underestimated them, and now they were paying the price. By the time the third hour arrived, the Zorath fleet was in full retreat. Their ships, now severely damaged, limped toward the outer edges of the system. The once formidable force that had threatened to overwhelm us was now nothing more than a disorganized mess of vessels, trying to escape with what little they had left. But it was too late. The humans had already won. Their quick thinking, their unwavering resolve, had shattered the Zorath's confidence. Their fleets were no longer a threat to us. The Zorath had been forced into a full retreat, their invasion plans in ruins. The tide had shifted. The war was no longer a hopeless endeavor. We had witnessed the unimaginable. A small, unassuming species, with little more than courage and ingenuity on their side, had brought the mighty Zorath Empire to its knees. And as the last Zorath ships fled the system, we knew one thing for certain. The humans had not just joined the fight, they had won it. The Emperor had changed, and these emperors were no longer allies with the Vaders, but instead the current military expedition had accepted the tide of the Zoraths, fled the Zorath, and was welcomed. Why? The victory was nothing short of miraculous, but as we watched the remnants of the Zorath fleet retreating, I couldn't shake the feeling of disbelief. It felt surreal, almost impossible. For years we had fought and bled, our civilizations crumbling beneath the relentless onslaught of the Zorath Empire. We had lost so much, seen so many of our people extinguished, and for the longest time, we had resigned ourselves to the grim truth. We would fall. And then, in a matter of hours, the impossible happened. The humans did what no one thought possible. They won. The Zorath, though retreating, were not yet broken. They had suffered severe damage, yes, but they were still a formidable force. There were rumors that they would regroup and return with reinforcements, that they would try again. The humans, however, did not hesitate. In the aftermath of the battle, they didn't pause to celebrate or rest. Their fleet, although small and battered, immediately began to pursue. They didn't stop to count their victories or celebrate their improbable triumphs. They moved with urgency, pressing on, not allowing the Zorath any opportunity to regroup or recover. It was as though they had no concept of fear, no hesitation to face the enemy once more. They had struck a decisive blow, but it was only the first of many. The humans' leadership was clear. There would be no reprieve for the Zorath. They had tasted victory, and now they were determined to finish what they had started. It wasn't about pride or glory for them. It was about ensuring that the Zorath would never return to threaten the galaxy again. In the days that followed, their ships moved like a swarm, coordinated and relentless. They hunted down the remnants of the Zorath fleet, cornering them, cutting off their escape routes, and forcing them to fight with nowhere to run. The Zoraths, who had once believed they could crush any resistance, found themselves on the receiving end of a war they couldn't control. The humans, in their unpredictable brilliance, had turned the tide entirely. What had once been a scattered and divided alliance was now united under the banner of victory. In the midst of it all, I saw something that had been missing for so long. Hope. It wasn't just that we had won a battle. It was the realization that, maybe for the first time in generations, we could win the war. The Zorath, for all their might, had underestimated the power of human determination. They had assumed that the galaxy's weaker races would crumble before them, but the humans had shown us that, with enough courage and ingenuity, victory was not just possible, it was inevitable. Our fleet, once hesitant and broken, now surged forward with newfound strength. We joined the humans in their pursuit of the Zorath remnants, striking down their outlying ships, ensuring that no part of their empire would escape unscathed. As we fought alongside the humans, it became clear that they were not just allies in the battle. They were leaders. They had led us to this moment, and now we were following their example. I watched as the human commanders, calm and focused, directed their ships with precision. Their strategy was simple, but it worked. They didn't chase the enemy blindly. They cut off escape routes, cornered their targets, and eliminated threats with ruthless efficiency. There was no hesitation, no fear. They had become the hunters, and the Zorath were the prey. As the Zorath forces dwindled, so too did the remnants of their empire. The survivors, scattered and broken, had no choice but to retreat to their farthest corners of the galaxy, fleeing to distant sectors where the human fleet could not yet reach. But even then, we knew the humans would follow. There would be no place for the Zorath to hide, no world too far out of reach. The humans would hunt them down, relentlessly, until not a single ship remained. It was in these final days, as the war drew to a close, that we saw the true impact of the humans' involvement. It wasn't just about technology or firepower. It was about their unyielding resolve. They had given us something we hadn't had in so long, the belief that we could stand up to the Zorath, the belief that we could win. The war, which had once seemed like an endless nightmare, was finally coming to an end. The humans had done what no one else could. They had turned the tide, shattered the Zorath's dominance, and shown us all what it meant to fight for something greater than ourselves. As we watched the final remnants of the Zorath Empire crumble, we knew that the galaxy would forever be the same, and we knew, too, that humanity would forever be a force to be reckoned with. As the remnants of the Zorath Empire scattered into the far reaches of the galaxy, something changed within us. It was subtle at first, but undeniable. For the first time in centuries, we were no longer just surviving. We were beginning to rebuild. The war was over, and the Zorath were no longer a threat. The human fleet, their ships battered but victorious, had shifted from destruction to reconstruction. Their commanders, calm and methodical, began to assist in the rebuilding efforts. They didn't just see their victory as a means to an end. They saw it as an opportunity to forge a new future for the galaxy. Zorth had left behind a trail of devastation, entire worlds reduced to rubble, millions of lives lost. For many of us, the scars of war would never fully heal. But the humans, who had seen their own planet torn apart in wars of their own making, understood what it meant to rebuild. They didn't offer empty promises or try to impose their own ways on us. Instead, they worked alongside us, helping to rebuild the infrastructure of our shattered worlds. They shared their technology not as conquerors, but as allies, showing us how to heal our wounded civilizations. The speed at which they adapted to the galaxy was nothing short of remarkable. They didn't just provide military support. They helped us understand the very fabric of this galaxy, the politics, the dynamics between species, the things we had overlooked in our own battles. The Zorath, in their arrogance, had ignored the smaller races, believing them weak, unworthy of attention. But the humans had a different perspective. They didn't see themselves as superior to anyone. They understood that every civilization had its strengths, its unique contributions. They didn't want to dominate, they wanted to unite. And they did. Slowly but surely, the galaxy began to change. What had once been a fractured collection of war-torn planets now began to forge new alliances, new pacts. The humans, with their unmatched resolve and an innate understanding of what it meant to build rather than destroy, became the glue that held us together. They didn't impose their will upon us. They simply offered a hand, and we took it. It wasn't without its challenges. Many of the older, more entrenched species resisted the changes. Some of the more conservative factions of the Krithar, who had long been wary of the humans, eyed them with distrust. There were whispers that the humans would turn on us once the war was over, that their leadership was just a fleeting moment of opportunism. But every day that passed proved the opposite. The humans didn't want to dominate. They wanted to build a future where no one species ruled over another, but instead where all races could coexist and thrive. The healing process wasn't just physical, it was cultural, emotional. We had been at war for so long, caught in a cycle of destruction, that we had forgotten what it meant to trust. The humans taught us that trust could be earned, that despite the scars of our past, we could move forward. They didn't just fight with us, they listened to us. They understood our pain, our fears. They didn't dismiss us as weak. They respected our histories and helped us write a new chapter, one where cooperation, not dominance, defined our future. As the months passed, we began to see the fruits of this new alliance. The once impossible dream of peace began to take shape. The human fleet, now integrated into the broader galactic defense forces, didn't just guard against external threats. They worked with us to establish new trade routes, new communication networks, and new cultural exchanges. The Zorath had forced us to unite, but the humans gave us the tools and the hope to make that unity permanent. The first time I stood alongside a human, not as an ally in battle, but as a partner in rebuilding, was a moment I will never forget. We stood together, looking over a once devastated world, now beginning to show the first signs of recovery. The sky, once blackened with the smoke of destruction, was clear again, and the people, our people, and those of other races, began to rebuild their homes, their cities, their lives. There was work to be done, yes, but the future seemed brighter than it had in generations. The humans had shown us the value of perseverance, of resilience. They had not only brought an end to the war, they had brought us a chance at something far more valuable: peace. And in the end, that was the true victory. The war had been won in hours, but the real challenge, the challenge of rebuilding, of forging a future where every species could live in harmony, would take a lifetime. But for the first time, we felt ready for it. Together, with the humans by our side, we were ready to build something that would last. As the months turned into years, the galaxy began to transform in ways none of us could have predicted. The war was a distant memory, though the scars of the conflict were still visible in the shattered worlds and the haunted eyes of survivors. But the humans had done more than just help us defeat the Zoroth. They had given us the tools, the knowledge, and the will to rebuild. Not just our cities, but our very way of life. They had shown us that unity was possible, and more importantly, they had shown us that peace was worth fighting for. The changes were subtle at first. The newly formed alliance between the species that had once been divided, often by decades of distrust, now seemed like a genuine force for good. The humans, with their remarkable ability to adapt and connect with others, had become the diplomatic bridge between races that had once been at war. They didn't just bring military strength to the table, they brought something far more valuable: understanding. Under their guidance, the Crithar and other species began to trade more freely, exchanging resources and technology. Our once fragile economies began to stabilize, and for the first time in centuries, we had hope. The human fleets, now integrated with ours, no longer patrolled for enemy fleets. They worked alongside us in what we now called the Galactic Rebuilding Initiative. It wasn't just a military operation. It was a mission to restore everything that had been lost: planets, economies, and cultures. The human commanders didn't just direct operations from afar. They led the charge, working side by side with us, getting their hands dirty in the rubble of worlds once destroyed by the war. It was the rebuilding of one planet that stands out most in my mind. The world of Talara, once a thriving hub of trade and culture, had been reduced to a barren wasteland during the final Zoroth invasion. Its cities lay in ruin, its resources depleted, and its people scattered. But under the guidance of human engineers and Crithar architects, Talara began to rise from the ashes. The humans didn't just bring their advanced technology, they brought their creativity, their optimism. They worked tirelessly, day after day, and slowly Talara's once dead atmosphere began to clear. The factories, once silent, hummed with the sound of industry. The cities, reduced to rubble, began to take shape again, brick by brick. It wasn't just about rebuilding infrastructure. The humans helped us rebuild something deeper: our spirits. The shared suffering of the war had forged bonds, but those bonds had often been tempered with resentment and fear. The humans didn't gloss over that. They acknowledged it and helped us work through it. They organized cultural exchanges where the once isolated races could meet, share their stories, and understand each other. It wasn't just about politics or resources anymore. It was about healing. As more species joined in the rebuilding effort, something remarkable happened. The once disparate races that had been bound by nothing more than a shared enemy now began to see each other as partners, as equals. The Zoroth may have been the catalyst for our unity, But the humans had shown us how to make that unity enduring. We began to see the galaxy not as a fractured collection of worlds, but as a collective, a community. We were no longer fighting for survival. We were fighting for something greater, a future. It was on the 10th anniversary of the victory that we held the first Galactic Summit, an event that would have been inconceivable before the war. Representatives from every race, from the smallest to the largest, came together to sign a treaty of permanent peace and cooperation. The humans, with their unassuming presence and quiet confidence, played a pivotal role in bringing us all together. They didn't take the lead. They didn't impose their will, but their influence was undeniable. They had shown us what it meant to move beyond our differences and work for the greater good. I stood in the council hall that day, surrounded by species I once thought of as enemies, and I realized how far we had come. The scars of war were still there, but they were fading, replaced by the promise of a future built on collaboration and mutual respect. The humans had not just won the war, they had won our hearts. They had proven to us that even in the darkest of times, when everything seems lost, there is always hope, always a way forward. As I looked out at the gathered leaders, I realized something else. The galaxy was no longer defined by its divisions, its endless conflicts. We were a part of something greater now, something that would endure for generations to come. The war had ended, but a new era had begun, and in that new era, humanity had taken its place as one of the galaxy's greatest allies, not through domination, but through the quiet strength of their resolve, their ingenuity, and their unwavering belief in the possibility of a better future. They had stood with us when no one else would, and now they had helped us stand together. And for the first time in my life, I knew that peace was not just a fleeting dream, it was a reality.